I'm eating cheese. Sitting in a green light eating cheese.
Oh my god, I want Dairy Queen.
I'm eating cheese. I'm sitting in a weird green light just eating cheese. I'm eating cheese in a weird green light. That makes it green cheese. I'm eating cheese with a big old knife in a weird green light. I'm gonna eat cheese. Greetings, programs. It's Dungeons and Dragons here. Another awesome episode. How to play D&D like a big old badass. First of all, get yourself a nice big piece of cheese. Big knife. Cut yourself a piece. That's how the dwarves did it, and that's how we do it up in here. Well, welcome to episode 3 of
Room Design,
where we're gonna recap the rooms that my PvE group plays on Friday nights. I'll let you know how it went, what we did, and what worked and what didn't work. Now, got another series coming out on the basics of playing D&D and DMing tips and all that stuff. So you hear me talking about these principles a lot, but if you ask me, one of the biggest parts about being a DM, besides just reading the room, keeping your players moving, is designing encounters and rooms that make sense, that keep choices closed, that press time, that make choices clear, and give objects and details that are present meaning. You don't want to put stuff in your rooms and in your encounters that the players aren't looking for the meaning. If you have a lever on the far wall and they have to struggle across a bunch of spike pits to reach the level and they pull it and nothing happens because you've set up some elaborate trap somewhere else, it's very disappointing. So anyway, this room, we just came down the drainage chute from the guardhouse, and the players popped into a narrow tunnel right here where there was barely standing room. And the first thing they had to do was dex check their way across this little gap of corrosion. And right away, we got to play with the item damaging rust pits. So our cleric came plopping down and instantly corroded his shield into nothingness. And the players realized their health was not really at stake here, but their items and armor were all degrading. So the rule we would use is I basically made my entire room a rust monster. So every time that you would fail avoiding the corrosion, if you were passing through one of these green spaces, your piece of gear would either lose 1 point of benefit, so if it's armor, it'd lose 1 point of benefit, or if it was a weapon, it would drop a damage class. So if it's a D6 weapon and then it corrodes, it's a D4 weapon. If it corrodes after the D4, it's destroyed because there's no smaller dice. So on and so forth. So that brought a gravity to the room right away that was just like, no, this is crazy. And also, we're deep in the Underdark, so it's not like you just go to town and buy another crossbow. So, the players made it through this initial set of tunnels. We had some dex check to jump some chasms, and so on and so forth. And as we entered the gloom here, the 2 rust monsters revealed themselves. I'm not sure how good you can see this little guy right here, but I made some homemade rust monsters just using some plastic spiders. Never really gotten around to painting them anything but black, but I got those big antennas that rust monsters have. And they worked really well. I just used a gold coin for a base and kind of whipped them together, but they work really good because they give you a sense of like, oh god, there's like 2 giant bugs coming. So sometimes just using another goblin mini just doesn't cut the mustard. So the players came in and they basically skirted one side of the corrosion, drawing the rust monsters over, and our wizard Milo Underbottom managed to scurry over here by this sort of twisted pillar. Now I had set the encounter up to have a couple of fail-safe devices if the players were overwhelmed. One of them, and I'm not sure you can see it, it's right back here. Whoop, this little guy. This guy is a little island of land with 4 occupiable squares on it. And it's hidden right here behind this rotten pillar. Now I was going to use a dex check to make this jump right here. And if you can make that jump, you are effectively hidden. So no matter what the rust monster is doing, whether it saw you or not, it loses track of you. So I was going to give a 4-man hiding spot. But you have to find it, you have to figure it out, and then you got to make the dex check. So it's not free, but it's if you really are getting beat, there's a way to hide. The players are trying to make it to the exit over here, and what is the timer for this room, you ask? Well, we had a great mechanic that served two functions. One as a timer, which, as you guys know, always press your characters to get out of the room. That will press them forward. They won't do things like taking 20. They don't have confusion about where they're going next. Generally, I don't even like the Wizards of the Coast encounter maps because they have too many exit options. If a room has more than one or even two at the most exit options, it's overwhelming. It feels like a maze, and it's terrible. So, what was the timer in this room, you ask? Well, let me tell you. After a few turns, we had our sort of lead character, which is usually Florian, our cleric, making perception checks. He's trying to figure out what's out here. So he spotted the rust monsters coming in, but also he spotted a huge swarm of tiny insects up here near the ceiling of the cavern. Now this swarm of insects serve two purposes for me as the DM. One, they ever so slowly, turn after turn, get more and more interested in the characters. So they are becoming aware of the character's location. The other thing I used it for is a classic, which is stack and spread. So if you want to do an encounter where you want your players to condense, create a debuff that only gets them when they spread. So a great one might be, for forcing characters to stack, you might want to drop like hails of darts, and there are small isolated areas where the darts don't hit and everybody needs to collapse into those protected spaces. For this case, the bugs were drawn to all four characters, so when the four characters would bunch up, the bugs would realize all their prey was in one area and they would form this cone of insects that would come down and do 1d4 per round to the entire group, which may not sound like a lot, but as a passive enemy that you can't hurt, 1d4 every round is absolutely brutal. So the characters only took about 2 rounds of that before they figured out they had to spread out. So this brought me my movement mechanic and my timer. So it can get really boring if you're in a melee only fight and the players just bunch up and then it's all attack rolls. You really want people to be forced to move. So I also had one of my rust monsters pull out and retreat, endure a couple of attacks of opportunity just to keep the party moving. But your worst encounters are going to be ones where you just get into a melee combat, you're locked in place, and everybody's just trying to roll d20s and roll damage and get it over with. Another great one to keep people moving is the old don't stand in the green shit principle. So another option in this cave might be that the ceiling is covered in this green goo, and every once in a while a glob of it drops on the terrain, like right there, and that glob is now, it's eating into the stone, and oh god, and if there's a player standing there, he's taking a lot of damage, much less if there's multiples, and then it eventually fades and relocates. So what this will do again is keep players afraid, keep players on their toes, and keep them changing location and trying to move and use movement dynamics to keep the fight changing. So anyways, we managed somehow to defeat the rust monsters, which is amazing. I do think the rust monsters are a little low on hit points in the book, so if you're considering doing an encounter like this and you have 4 skilled players, definitely up their hit points or they will get owned. We walked out of this with, 2 or 3 destroyed items and some really degraded armor, but there was a great back door that the party came up with halfway through the encounter. We have a druid who took the mend cantrip, which, by the way, no one ever takes the mend cantrip. And nor should you. Who wants to fix holes in adventurers' jeans? Nobody. Anyways, she just happened to take it, being awesome, and with item damage being the principal damage of the encounter, a character with item healing suddenly becomes uber high value. So she was almost removed from the fight, our druid right here, Twigs. She's almost removed from the fight and her sole purpose became running back and forth like a crazy person, healing the equipment so that our melee fighters wouldn't be either too vulnerable or unable to kill the rust monster because their weapons got buggered. So really cool to see a player's superfluous, almost secondary abilities that they thought would never really come in that handy really be clutch in a fight like that. So that's another great mechanic to press when you're planning your rooms. Don't overdo your rooms. If you can write down the summary of the key components of your room in about 4 or 5 lines in your little DM's book, you're in a good spot. If it takes a page, you're never going to remember everything. The math is going to crumble and you're going to be clunky and slow and it's going to be bad. So this is a really simple room to do. Now having the cool terrain and having the roll box, we have this big felt lined pine roll box that we made, which lets everybody roll their dice in the same space. It lets everyone have minis around without it being in the way. It presents a really clear sense of where everything is. That definitely helps a lot. So if you don't have all those tools, you're going to be a little more on the hook for some work when it comes time to get your players imagining what you're imagining. But generally, try to focus your room design on a short list of key things. 1, what's the threat? What do the players get to battle? There's got to be something. If it's nothing, it's a puzzle and everyone falls asleep because Mountain Dew only goes so far. Number 2, what's the timer? Why are they not just able to camp in here and set up a summer home and live in happily forever after? Got to keep the players moving. If you let players rest every encounter, you won't be able to make anything hard enough. And finally, 3, how do you keep movement happening in an interesting way? That can be stack and spread, that can be stay out of the green stuff, that can be move ever forward. A lot of you guys have probably played some encounters where you have like a moving wall of spikes and you gotta kind of press forward, or maybe they're crushing in like this. Maybe there's big blocks that are coming down and you're needing to move your way through. So keep your players moving. When they stop moving and they're just making rolls, again, hey, that's it for episode 3. I'm gonna shut up now.